Hey, what's up, you guys? Bloody Jacob here to bring you another movie review. This time we're going to be talking about the CGI animated Resident Evil film, Resident Evil Vendetta, which is the third one of these that they've done, I believe. Of course, there's Degeneration, there's Damnation a couple years ago, and now we have Resident Evil Vendetta. And I'm a pretty big fan of Resident Evil, actually. I really love, the games at least. The live action movies and me don't really have a good history. I did do reviews on a few of the live action films, but I was in a weird mood and I feel like I was a bit too generous in some of those reviews. But I don't really care for live action movies at all. They're just really simple shoot 'em ups, and they just butcher the source material. And they just simplify everything that they possibly can. But these CG films, Degeneration, Damnation, Vendetta, and hopefully other ones, I think do a much better job at capturing the spirit of the games, or at least making the characters feel like themselves instead of having original characters that either don't fit in with it and take center stage. But yeah, anyway, Resident Evil Vendetta, I liked actually quite a bit. I enjoyed it. These movies are more, action-driven than, people would want from the games, because I know a lot of people just prefer, the survival horror aspects of the games. But I personally really liked Resident Evil 5 as well, and I honestly loved Resident Evil 6, just for its story and its characters and stuff like that. I thought it was fantastic. I'll do a video on that by itself at some point. And Vendetta and all these CG movies so far are supposed to tie in with the games. And that's something I think could be a little bit better with, because it's kind of loose, don't really hear much brought up about the events of the games themselves. But if you want to connect and imagine or think that takes place, in between, like this one supposedly takes place just before part 6, I believe. Or just after part 6, excuse me. Damnation took place just before 6, and then, so down and so forth. If that even is a phrase, I don't know. But yeah, so I think they could do a little bit better of a job at, just acknowledging the events of the games if they're going to do it that way. But I'm fine. I'm glad they exist, within the world of the games, and they still acknowledge, Resident Evil 6 and stuff like that in a certain way, in a certain extent, anyway. And like I said, I really liked Vendetta. I don't know if it's my favorite so far. I'd have to debate between this one and Damnation, because I really liked, seeing Ada, Juan, and Damnation. With Chris Redfield and Ada being my favorite characters, in the franchise, definitely makes me go back and forth. Because Ada is in the last one, but she's not in this one, but Chris Redfield is. I guess I'd have to say maybe Chris is my favorite character just by a smidgen or something. I don't know. But I really like this one. It's a pretty simple, I guess you could say typical, Resident Evil plot. I'll read you the back of it right now. When a fearless enemy out for revenge unleashes a brutal and deadly new virus, BSAA Captain Chris Redfield enlists the help of Agent Leon S. Kennedy and Professor Rebecca Chambers to bring down the Death Merchant and save New York City. So it's, again, one of those, terrorist, big BOW threat, kind of scenarios. So you've seen this, type of threat and mission and plenty of Resident Evil stuff before, both in the movies and in the games, although trust me, it's still better than the live action movies. But good thing about this is that they do give the villain a little bit of a motive. They make it pretty clear with him. He wasn't, I don't think he was a great antagonist, but at least they addressed it and had to make sense instead of just him being dick for no reason. It turned out his wife had been killed when they were going after him and stuff like that, and so he's kind of just lost it. He's snapped. He's psychologically just deranged now, because he tries to basically get Rebecca to marry him at one point in the movie, and setting up a similar scenario to that him and his wife had, except of course they had survived and lived happily ever after. And he even had his wife's severed arm or something like that. So yeah, he goes a bit far with it, but you can understand, his anger towards, the organizations and stuff like that. So that part was alright. But definitely the main draw of this and what had me most excited was seeing, Chris Redfield and Leon S. Kennedy in one of these movies together. I geeked the hell out when they were in the same game, with Resident Evil 6. They had some fantastic moments in that. So it was great to see a little bit of a continuation of that dynamic there, at least sort of. As far as the voice cast goes, they did fairly well. I thought they were all right. Matthew Mercer voiced Leon Kennedy, and he's voiced him before. He's actually voiced him more than anyone. So he's kind of the known voice of the character, which is good that they brought him back for this. But when that doesn't, why that doesn't add up as much is because they take, hold on a second, guys, excuse me, I want to check my facts here just to be sure I'm not spewing bullshit. Yeah. Or he at least voiced Leon in Resident Evil 6 as well as Damnation, so at least there's some, continuation there in terms of how the character sounds. And, he still sounds a fair bit like Leon in the, Resident Evil 4, too, at least for the most part. But what bothers me is kind of the voice for Chris Redfield, Kevin Dorman. He didn't do a bad job, necessarily. I just sort of really would have preferred them bringing back Roger Craig Smith, who has been, the voice of Chris Redfield for quite a while now. Resident Evil 6, 5, things like that. And this guy sounds a little bit like him, but in certain scenes he sounds a little bit more generic. He sounds a little more just like a typical, nice, cool guy kind of tone to him. And, I just feel like Roger Craig Smith always brought more depth and more, just brought, sort of that rough and, worn edge, to Chris after all these years. But, Kevin Dorman still did an alright job with it. I ended up dealing with it as the movie went on. But it's just odd how they just switched his voice after, he had been working with the character for so long. But, they still brought back the same motion capture guy they've had for, Chris Redfield for, quite a few years now, Ruben Langdon, which is good. But still preferred Smith's voice. But I'm going to stop talking about that. Also, like I said, these movies and this one included, they're still very action driven. They're definitely most like Resident Evil 5 and 6 in terms of the kind of or the style it is. But there are still moments of genuine intensity and sort of creepiness, especially in the beginning of the film, where you see Chris and his team going through eerily enough a mansion. So it still mixes in a little bit of those elements that other fans would appreciate from the games and everything like that, and I really like that opening as well. And then in terms of the CG and how everything looks visually, it's pretty good. It's about on par with the games. It's like watching all the cutscenes put together from a game or something. It's about on par with that. So you could say maybe it should be better than that or something, but I think it still looks fairly good. I've seen some critics say the facial expressions or at least the showing of real emotion could be a little bit better. And yeah, maybe true, but I don't think it's awful. And like I said, it's just watching all the cutscenes put together or something. I don't really have a big issue with that. And there's actually quite a bit of zombie violence in this one. It's not a lot of over the top new mutations. We get a lot of zombies in this, and a couple, of course, big mutated monsters too at the same time. So it's always that's a staple nowadays, right? But yeah, I keep on saying it, but I really like this one, And I know I keep bringing up the live action movies, and even though this is more action driven as well, this is still far superior to live action films because it still captures the spirit of the games, I feel like, more successfully. The characters are still the characters, they're still true to what we know of them. I haven't seen much on Rebecca Chambers in a while. I know they kind of changed her with the scientist stuff, I guess, but especially with Leon and Chris, I think they definitely did that right. Whereas the movies just kind of disregard them and skim over them or don't really add the depth that they have in the games. Whereas this, feels all connected, at least, loosely in between the main games and such. And I loved, I like the movie well enough, but there's this hallway fight scene with Chris and Leon. They're not fighting each other, but there's just I'll say there's a ton of zombies in this scene right here, and I can see Chris just taking on a bunch of them one-on-one, going from just mowing them down with his machine gun to actually having to go barehanded with then with a knife and stuff like that. And we see Leon join eventually. It's really cool, and so he did some pretty good motion capture work here, and the choreography is pretty nice, I thought, for whatever it was. So yeah, I really like Resident Evil Vendetta. I can't deny it. I was just really in the mood for it. I just thought, why the fuck haven't I watched this yet? And I did, and I got a good kick out of it, and I'm happy to have it in my collection as a fan. So if I had to rate this, I'm rating it about a B+. The only real negatives I have with it are, like I said, the Chris Redfield voice I'm a little bit bothered by, but he's not awful or anything. And I still loved Chris Redfield in this movie. He gets a lot of really cool fight scenes, and he still feels like the character in terms of writing, just how he acts generally. Leon was cool too. Then other issues, like I said, the plot's a bit typical for Resident Evil. The villain, well, understandable in this movie, which is nice, is still kind of feels generic as well. And some of the dialogue itself feels like it could be a bit better. It doesn't have some of the depth that the conversations in the games do. It feels a bit simple and just kind of point A, point B sort of. But other than that, I think it was a really good time, and I definitely recommend it to any fan of the series. So follow me on Facebook, Twitter, subscribe. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.